Hello and a very warm welcome to another thrilling edition of the Andrew Eborn Show. And in fact, a special edition when we remember the fantastic performer Des O'Connor. And to help me do that, I brought my special guest along, the wonderful Paul Gordon. How are you, Paul?
I'm very good. And Des O'Connor. Now, Andrew, did I tell you once upon a time that before I turned professional as a magician, I used to work in the theatre business. So between 79 and about 95, I think it was, I was assistant manager of 3 theatres, and I was house manager, marketing manager. I did dog's body basically, but I used to welcome all the artists, and I used to book some of the artists. And Des O'Connor was always a joy to book. He was always a joy to talk to, and a joy backstage, and he was just lovely with everybody. And one of my memories of him is this is at the Pavilion Theatre in Worthing. And just to give you an idea of what a professional he was, he came out and he did about an hour and 20 first half and about an hour and 20 second half. And in the first half, the first thing he did, which we knew was impromptu, he sat on the bar stool to sing a song, and then he started getting all funny about, larking around with the audience. And then he stood on the bar stool to sing this song, but he slipped and he hit, and you could see he hit his groin on the edge of the bar stool as he came down. But he carried on. He did an hour and 20, and when he came off in the break, he was in absolute agony. And he said he'd learnt that years ago, just keep on smiling through, because they're not interested if you've hurt yourself, really. They just want to see the show. But he had actually damaged himself very badly in the nether regions.
Yes. Oh no, poor chap. And it is glorious though. I mean, he was one of the ones who was just a consummate professional when he wanted to do that sort of side. And but also he didn't mind taking the mickey out of himself or letting others take the mickey out of himself. And his relationship with Morecambe and Wise was legendary, wasn't it?
Well, I can remember, I don't think it was a Morecambe and Wise joke, but isn't it the joke about the guy who goes into the chemist back in the day when chemists did everything? He goes into the chemist to buy a packet of condoms, and he was so embarrassed he came out with a Des O'Connor record. Which is a wonderful, that's a typical kind of Morecambe and Wise joke, isn't it? Def O'Connor, all that kind of stuff they used to do. And Des would come on the show, wouldn't he? On Morecambe and Wise show, Des would come on and play along with the gag, which is actually the best way to handle it, isn't it?
And, it was super. And Eric Morecambe, Eric Morecambe was, I remember a lovely story. Eric Morecambe was very sick one time, and very, very sick. And Des actually said he'll do a special concert, and and all the money raised would basically go to something nice for good old Eric Morecambe. And Eric heard about this and said, well, that's 6 people who might be able to help, isn't it? So what a capacity crowd. So even when he was very ill. But I met Des, and he is, everybody's got their Des stories. So as you know, I used to do lots of these warm-ups, and I used to warm up at Thames Television for a lot of things. And I actually warmed up the Des O'Connor show for some of those, in amongst other things, and Give Us a Clue, and This Is Your Life. I did some of those. But Des was brilliant. And what I loved about him, I remember on that show, he had Bob Hope was on the show. They would all come and talk to him. He also had Andrew O'Connor, who you will know, was a fantastic performer and still is a fantastic performer, but he did Copycats and was the youngest magician, whatever, and then formed Objective Productions. And then he brought on Derren Brown and did all magic on television with Anthony Owen and Michael Vine and so on and so forth. So Andrew and Michael were in the studio then, and because we knew each other, we had a lot of fun. But I was doing the warm-up then. And Des, a lot of times people wouldn't necessarily have time to talk to the warm-up artists because they're focused on other things. Des would make a point of speaking to everybody, from Bob Hope, who was there in the studio, to Andrew, a big star, to poor little me, and he would come and talk. And what we loved about him, he was one of the genuine people.
Yeah. And Des O'Connor, of course, like I said, when I met him a few times, I managed to I used to show him some magic, and eventually I did a very small invisible segment on the Des and Mel show when he did that. What's the name, Mel?
Yeah, I remember the Des and Mel show. That was great.
Yeah, and I did that, and I also remember, the the Stan Boardman moment. Do you remember the Stan Boardman moment?
I don't know, but a bell rings whenever you mention it. That was rather good. Timed beautifully. I love your little, when messages come through to Paul Gordon. Tell us about the Stan Boardman moment.
The Stan Boardman moment, where I think it was the death knell to Stan's career. When he came on, he started telling jokes about World War II Fockers.
The Germans. I can't do it. Yes, that sort of thing.
The Fockers. So, and he was playing on the word with the Fockers, and it was getting more embarrassing. And I think that was the last time he ever appeared on TV. That was on the Des O'Connor Tonight Show. But I always thought it was a bit unfair on Stan Boardman, because Freddie Starr got away with a lot of stuff, didn't he?
Well, I think it's that moment. It's a question of context, isn't it? Because you have those glorious moments so people they can end their careers on television, especially when it's live. You know what a fan I am of living by the edge of whatever it is.
Yeah.
About the children in need last time, the glorious moments then. And it is, but sometimes you have to be, and I agree with this, you have to be aware of who your audience is. And if it's a family audience, there's certain things that you don't want to do and certain words that you mustn't use, and you have to apologize and that sort of stuff. And it's not being clever or funny or whatever it is. It's just be sensitive to your audience. When it's an older audience and it's going out at the right time and people understand it's in context, you can do your shocking moments and you can do that sort of stuff. So I do get that while still wanting to be anarchic. It's rather like, and Julian Clary is a brilliant example. People talk about that sort of side. It's hilarious. And every time, but and you remember that moment with him and Norman Lamont, I thank you. We'll work. That wasn't even a gesture. We're working on that sort of moment. And the fact that we remember it and we can look back on it now, it's hilarious, but it's hilarious in that one moment when you want to shock the audience, and it's great, and it's one of the reasons that it doesn't go out live anymore. And they can cut it. People can, for a live audience, it's wonderful, it's shocking, and you can laugh, because most award ceremonies are interminably long and can be interminably boring. You want those glorious moments when Michael Barrymore would take away the auto cue. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Put it out of the thing. Whether it's rehearsed or not, I don't care. It worked in terms of television because you remember that. And actually, I agree, get rid of the auto cue, because you can bounce off the moment, live in the moment, and it makes much more edgy. But actually balance that with work out who your audience is, because you don't want something, you don't want there are some people who are certain sensitivity, I get it. And if it's a young audience, a family audience, then it's not the right moment to talk about certain things or put warnings on and so on and so forth. But no, you're right. It does happen. Poor Stan Boardman. What's happened to him now?
I have no idea. I don't think I've seen him since that moment.
We should try. Well, funny you should say that. I was like, yes, I will. I love it because he was hilarious and he was a staple. And one of the things we're going to be doing, there's announcements happening. I can probably tell you it's happening within 24 hours. Certain announcements will be made where you'll be surprised. All the people you thought had disappeared, we're going to be hunting them down, as well as some regular celebrities. The everyday folk, a galaxy of stars, will be coming your way. Announcement very, very shortly on that one. And I think that certain Paul Gordon might be involved as well with that. And we can talk about that in the not too distant future. But another chum who I was speaking to, who worked with Des and a number of others, was the wonderful Barry Cryer, who's been on the show. Do you know Barry?
Yes, I did a gig with Barry Cryer. I did a gig with him at the Train Museum, wherever it is, in Leeds, I think it was, somewhere out there. And when I say I gig with him, I was on the bill. I was doing the close-up magic, and he was the speaker. And I think every time I see a program about some famous comedian, they always bring Barry on, don't they, to reminisce about this, that, and the other. But he's so good at it, isn't he? And when you look back on the great, so the orators, some people who you think might be good genuinely aren't. I mean, like on talk shows, Eric Morecambe, I don't think was very good. But, you had the Barry Cryers and the Kenneth Williams and the Peter Ustonoffs used to light up talk shows, didn't they? And Barry Cryer, just one of the best.
Oh, absolutely superb. And he's been on the show. He's another regular, and he's absolutely wonderful. He was a Leeds lad. He was born up in Leeds and graduated from there, but wrote for everybody. He worked at the Windmill Theatre. He did all these sort of glorious bongo, bingo, and all that sort of stuff. And it was wonderful. And he had a hit. He was a #1 Do you know which country? Do you know the record?
No.
Ah, you see, they allowed me to do the punchline. It's
Oh,
with the
yeah.
purple people eater. The purple people.
That was him, was it?
He was it. Well, he was #1 in Finland. Could you believe, with his version of the Purple People Eater? And it's glorious. And I listened to that. It's hilarious stuff. But he wrote for Morecambe and Wise, and he wrote for Bob Hope, and he wrote anybody in the business. Barry's been written for writing. And what I love about it, when you talk about Des O'Connor, it's the wonderful team about it, because you then, behind all of these people, there is a whole team of people who will then feed you material, and you can drip feed it in. And whilst things are spontaneous, you can work out, it's that well-rehearsed ad lib that make it sound so glorious. But the point that you make about certain people being good on chat shows is certain people are much better being in character. And so many people play the character of themselves rather than who they are in real person. And when you're in a chat show in that sort of environment, unless you're doing a well-rehearsed, ask me this question, I can give my standard answer, bam, 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 it's very difficult for those who are characters, who just play a character on screen, to be themselves sometimes. And sometimes being themselves can be quite boring.
Well, Peter Sellers, famously, he used to say, you know, he hated being interviewed because he didn't know who he was. So when he did the Michael Parkinson interview back in '72, he said to Michael Parkinson, I'm going to come on as a German soldier. And he did, didn't he? And he came on with the sort of the archetypal German sort of language, and fooled around for about 5 minutes and then eased in a little bit. But he always looked uncomfortable, and
he looked uncomfortable because Stan Boardman was coming up next to tell the jokes about the Germans. That's what happened on that particular edition. But you're right. But Des, going back to Des and finishing on Des, is that he was the consummate performer, because on screen, and this is the point, on screen and off screen, he was just lovely, wasn't he?
Oh, I thought he was, and he you know, he was funny. He could dance. He's obviously a great singer, a great talk show host. I mean, he was, you know, so multi-talented, but almost underrated in some weird way. You know, whereas Bruce Forsyth became a sort of national treasure, Des O'Connor never really did he? I mean, you know, I think in later years he kind of got slightly forgotten a bit. Where you know, am I right?
Well, I don't know. Those in the business sound so pretentious, but those, anybody you would mention Des O'Connor, and a smile would come on their face, and everybody would have a Des O'Connor story. So I think from that point of view, we didn't see him on television very much in the last few years, and that's a shame. And even with all these old programs, they didn't really repeat some of them, and they were certainly worth repeating. I'm sure when the tributes came out and you saw those little clips, we could remember every one of those moments, couldn't we? You could remember the banter with Morecambe and Wise. You could remember him singing in those glorious moments. That you can remember the chat shows, and then all the memories come flooding back. And it's our favourite sort of Christmases, you know, the Morecambe and Wise shows where you used to have those big shows and the whole family sat round together wishing they had a television. You worked on those you used to work on that sort of principle. But that's what made Christmas, didn't it?
It did. I mean, you and I are similar age. I think I'm a little older than you.
I'm much older. I mean, a generation I've worked.
Oh, thanks. But we used to, in the 60s and 70s, we would sit round at Christmas time. We'd eat lunch, and then in the afternoon we'd play games and so on. And then come the evening, you were spoilt for choice. You had the two Ronnies, Morecambe and Wise, Des O'Connor. I mean, there was a host of things you could watch, and it would be a good TV. One of my favourite TV series in the early 70s to watch was the Colditz story. Yeah. And I loved all that.
Yeah. Stan Boardman was up there doing his gags.
And Stan Boardman as well, bless his cotton socks. If you bring him on, I'm going to kill you, by the way. The next time you see, you're quite safe because you're hidden away. The Magic Circle headquarters is yet to open, but when it does,
I know, it's glorious. I've been teasing, and I tell you what, the great thing about these things is that we're at 947. This will be the 947th interview that I've done since lockdown. So we're coming up to 1,000, which is amazing. So before the end, I think actually before we get into the building, the likelihood is that we would have hit the 1,000th. And as I say, it's all sorts of announcements. But yes, I can tease people relentlessly. We've had all sorts of people. But this is what I touched on this before. This is what I love about these things, and it is relevant to Des. What I love about this is that you can go on that roller coaster of emotion. And we do that. We talk about real issues. We talk about fun stuff, but you don't take it too seriously. It's that anarchic thing. You can laugh at yourself, laugh at your own foibles, recognize the narcissist in all of us, but also recognize the weaknesses. You know, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? And I think
I'm very much like that, Andrew. You know what? A lot of magicians, they often get me wrong. They think I'm this or they think I'm that and blah, blah, blah. You know, if a lot of them got to know me, they know I'm probably none of those things.
Oh, you're much worse, much worse.
I'm much worse, you know. But somebody said, you know, this is, every now and then somebody will tease me or they're being slightly nasty about it. Oh, Paul's a good, you know, he's always selling his stuff, you know. And I always say to myself, well, if I don't sell it, who will? Yeah. You know, I've been brought up in life that you have to make a good
Oh, you're frozen.
Go of whatever it is that you do. You have to make a go of it, a stab at it, don't you? Oh, I'm frozen. I'm back. No, I'm not.
You did. You suddenly said you had to make a go of it.
And it went.
You froze gloriously, which is wonderful. No, but you do, and this is what I don't get, because in America, what I love about it, people scream out their success and people celebrate the success. Yeah. I mean, generalizations are always false, including that one. But the reality is, if you were to say, in Britain, we sort of resent success a little bit, don't we? And
we
I
do.
I'm the same. I will always crow about things, but I'll also try and shine a spotlight on foibles, because I think it's important. Yeah. Use whatever voice I have to turn around and say, let's talk about canned laughter, let's talk about mental illness, and we can do it in a fun way because it makes it accessible. Yeah. But also we'll have people then come on because they feel comfortable enough, hopefully, and others can then benefit from hearing. Maybe others who maybe don't want to come on or whatever can listen to somebody in the public eye or somebody who they don't know but have a similar walk of life or a similar story and say, actually, I learned something from that. And when we talk about fees, I said this before, it's Jeff McBride who always says lovely things about you. Jeff McBride says a fee is a fair energy exchange. Yeah. And for me, a fair energy exchange, without being naff about it, it's not meant to be naff at all, is making a difference. And whether we make a difference because we can make somebody smile, or actually we can save somebody from going through the darkest despair. And we've had those moments as well. Yeah. That is the biggest reward of all.
I say to magicians, you know, not that it's advice or anything else, but I say, for my part, there's Paul Gordon, the magician or the writer, the author, the performer, and then there's a singer. But mostly I'm a family kind of a guy who I've got to, you know, I think I'm kind of learned in the ways of the world. I've been married far too many times. I've had hard times. I've been broke 2 or 3 times. I've had money 2 or 3 times. At the moment, I'm doing well. I've had mental health issues. I've had other issues. But I'm a very silly person. I've got a filthy sense of humor. I love to see the silly side of life, and I see the silly side of myself, because I've lived this way because we're all going to die, and we're all, you know, what are we saving emotions up for? You know, I'm a firm believer that when you're dead, and that's the end of it. So you've got, what was the old saying? You've got 70 years and 10. It's probably 70 years and 10 now. So why not make the best of it, whether it be trying to get work or advertising or having fun or being nice to people or being upset about things or being ill or healthy, whatever it may be that makes up life, at some stage, it's going to go. So why be so anal about stuff all the time? Why are people so withheld and tight, you know, all the time?
Well, it's insecurity. And what happened, it's a society which dictates that other people's success can only be determined by other people's failure. So and a lot of people will turn around and say, it's not enough just to succeed. You need to make sure that everybody else fails. And that's wrong. You know, you talk about, you're right, for now 70 years and 8 for Des, he was 88. And you work on that sort of premise where make a difference in people's lives, bring a bit of laughter, shine a little bit of light, make a difference, make people feel wanted. Don't necessarily just bring people down. And this is what happens. This is what I don't like. There's an element within society where you have to rubbish people. You have to do the poison, you do the trolling, or people make a living out of just rubbishing, that sort of attacking things. If it hasn't got a purpose, there's no point. My background as a lawyer, absolutely, I'll try and defend the underdog and put another side. It's not to have a go at somebody, it's to make sure that both sides are represented, recognizing that there's media manipulation, that we have our own prejudices and so on and so forth, and recognizing that if you don't question everything, all you're going to do is regurgitate your own prejudices all the time. And I love to look at things and put contrary arguments, however unpopular the contrary side might be. The only way to understand it and to make a difference is to lead people gently on a journey through that. So when we spoke beforehand about Trump and so on and so forth, and how the media, everybody just shutting him out and he's just rubbish and everything else, people won't see the other side, and you won't convert people just by shutting them out and saying it's rubbish. The way that you might convert people or getting them to understand your point of view is to listen and debate it. Jaw, not war.
Well, and so beautifully put, as always. And I you know, when it came up, we talked last time about this Brexit situation, and I was posing arguments about you know, the pros and cons of this, that, and the other, and both things. But every now and then, when I thought I was getting to a very good point I'm a Brexiteer, I don't mind admitting it. When I got to a pro point about it, somebody would then say on Facebook, all Brexiteers are racist morons or bigoted. And I said, this is the trouble. An argument, you know, if you can't argue something, people then go on the defensive, don't they? Or the offensive, and they start getting nasty and angry. Because if you put over a good point or a good argument, why not try and listen to it as opposed to getting nasty about it? But as you said, there are a lot of people who seem to think that their mission in life is to belittle or be unpleasant or be rude or angry or nasty about something or somebody's opinion. Just because somebody has an opinion, it doesn't mean they're right or wrong, or you're right or wrong, does it?
Well, no, I'm always right, but I think that no, but the principle is that, and the trouble is this, and it sounds awful and it sounds patronizing, but actually I think it's true, is that most people don't get enough evidence to understand the issues. So Brexit was a classic example, which was thrust through, we talked about Dominic Cummings and so on and so forth, on sound bites. So you have the big image of people will get, it's 350 million will come into our pocket, into the NHS, and not to know it's over there. You know, that's what will happen. That's your vote. Do you want that or not? Oh, okay. That's people. The reality is both sides, whether you were in or out, are shaking it all about, both sides were unhappy with the status quo. Both sides wanted to negotiate. And that's why you find some people flip-flopping from either side. The question is this: is it better to negotiate from the European Union, or is it better to negotiate when we're outside? Either way, we're still in Europe. The question is, how do we want to trade with the world? And actually, now that Trump may be gone, he's not yet finished, but he may be gone, we probably would have got a better deal with Trump than we will with Biden.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bizarrely. But that's what happens, and you have to turn around and say, understand that the reason you elect experts is they're supposed to be experts with hours and hours and hours, years and years and years of training, who are experts at particular issues to do what's best for us. Yeah. When you throw it back to people and ask them, it's like asking people, do I need a heart surgery? Well, let's put it to a popular vote. Thanks. What? It doesn't work that way. And that's the problem. And what the biggest problem as well there, Paul, is that everything is so divisive at the moment. You have to turn around and say, do you want this or do you want... And generations are not going to heal because of what we did when we talk about devolution, or we talk about in or out, or we talk about, what do you like, Trump or don't you? Do you talk about, do we wear masks, do we not wear masks? Everything is so divisive. And that's the problem.
And what happens for me, because I like arguing a good point. I like having a good argumentative, friendly discussion. I like discussions. I like, you know, both my wife and I, the thing that we enjoy mostly, neither of us like big
they never
parties.
meet. Absolutely.
Neither of us like big parties because it's just all waffle and, you know, and how do you do, old boy? But we love it when you can get, you know, say two couples round a table with a couple of drinks and you can have a good old bloody chinwag about everything under the sun. But as soon as it's stymied by somebody taking something personally or whatever it may be, it's time for me to quit and I get out there. Now, it sounds like a strange segue, but we babysit for our grandson on Thursdays, and he's an absolute leveler. You know, he's only 2 years old. He's a wonderful little boy, but it just makes you realize how wonderful the innocence of youth is, that you don't have to you just live in the moment and you have a wonderful time in the moment and you don't have to put up with all the bullshit. And so sometimes I revert back to being a 2-year-old boy, and I go down the end of the garden to my log cabin with a book and a glass of wine, and I just switch off from all the baloney out there.
And it's one, and I love the vision of you being a 2-year-old boy with a glass of wine. But what I also, but you're absolutely right. And I think sometimes, and it's true in my own family, that they're the great levelers, they're the great sort of in all the little industry, and it's all puff and fluff and all that sort of stuff. And we know that the reason that I like the people that I like and we chat about it, it's genuinely interesting. It's not that the reason you have chums who are very, very famous and A-listers and everything else, as well as down to everyday folk, is because you treat them all the same. People. And people are surprised at that. And I've said this beforehand, and people would say, take one A-lister, and one person will say, oh, I met them and they were so lovely. And the other person will say, oh, I met them, they're really horrible. And the reality is, yes, to both of those. Because people, depending on when you catch them, they're going to be good and bad and everything else. But levelers are absolutely great. My grandmother, I remember when I qualified as a lawyer after many years, and I got a scholarship to the bar, and I got my free wig and Batman gown, and my grandmother was there at my call to the bar, and she said to me, "I wish you'd been a doctor." Yes, that's what you want. That's what you want. But talking about unifying there, and just to finish,
I love that. That is so funny.
Yeah, talking about unifying, just to finish on this point, Des was universally liked. I haven't come across anybody who didn't adore Des, and perhaps his lasting memory was exactly that. He was the all-round entertainer. He was brilliant at what he did, but he didn't take himself too seriously, and he could laugh at himself, laugh at Eric Morecambe taking the mickey out of him. And if there's ever a lesson to be learned about how to survive in this business, and after 88 years is a fantastic, wonderful body of work he's given us, which we're now going to dip back into. It's been absolute joy, hasn't it?
It is. I mean, and a wonderful little vignette on this. I mean, I've never been involved in television producing, but he must have been a television producer's delight, that you could invite somebody like him who would be lovely to everybody. His timekeeping was perfect. He could fill in to do anything. He could sing a song, he could dance, he could tell some funny stories, he'd be erudite. Almost the perfect person to have on a show, a variety show, I guess. And it reminded me of I don't know why, but it reminded me when working in the theatre, when we used to have riders for all these artists. And the longer the rider, the more pompous the artist used to be. And I can remember some of these riders used to go on forever and ever and ever. And Des O'Connor's would be just like one little sentence about something. And although this little story isn't about Des, it's about Frankie Vaughan. And Frankie Vaughan's rider used to say, I don't suppose I could have a plate of sandwiches, could I? Which I thought was, it's not only could I have a plate of sandwiches, it's I don't suppose I could have a plate of sandwiches, could I? And I think Des O'Connor was very much like that. He would sort of come down and say, oh, any chance of a cup of tea? You know, it wouldn't be like 3 crates of whiskey, 4 buns and 10 sandwiches and this, that and the other for the band, you know. And I think that kind of thing was Des O'Connor. He was a very nice guy, but also he went on stage and became very professional and just the perfect kind of entertainer, really.
Absolutely. Paul Gordon, thank you so much for joining me, remembering the fabulous Des O'Connor. Look forward to seeing you next time. Be good.
Bye-bye.